Let me paint you a picture. You've just finished a long shift at work. You're drained. Maybe you're running on caffeine and adrenaline, but you're glad to be heading home. You pull into the driveway and you see one light on, the bathroom upstairs. The house is dark otherwise. You walk inside, you call your partner's name, silence. Something in your stomach twists. So you walk upstairs, you push open the bathroom door, and your entire world collapses. There's the person you love the most, naked, face down in the bathtub, phone in the bottom, waterlogged tray floating around, and they're not moving. And that moment, you don't think, you don't calculate, you don't reason, you don't panic, you shout, you shake them. You're convinced, absolutely convinced you've just lost them. But then they move, they stir, they laugh incoherently because they're not dead. They're drunk, oblivious. And now what you are left with, your body is flooded with adrenaline. Your heart is pounding out of your chest and you've just rehearsed your worst nightmare. And instead of relief, you feel angry, confused, shaken. And this right here is the reality of one man's Reddit story. A 24-year-old husband married to a 24-year-old wife who nearly lost her life in a bathtub after too much wine and too little food. And here's why this story matters. It's not just because it's one reckless night. It's about what happens when near-death moments collide with relationships. It's about how alcohol can take a normal night and turn it into trauma. And it's about the choices that couples face afterward. Do we sweep it under the rug or do we grow from it? That's what we're unpacking in this deep dive. Because when you look at the story through a counselor's eyes, you see more than a drunk accident. What you see is the autonomy of trauma, the psychology of anger and fear colliding, the thin line between accountability and shame, the role of friends and community and safety, and the opportunity every couple has to transform close calls into deeper trust. So let's slow it down and zoom in and explore this moment together. First, let's acknowledge the shock factor here. Because when you read a Reddit post like this, it's easy to skim past the emotional weight, but stop for a moment. Have you ever had a second where you thought you lost someone? Maybe your toddler slipped out of sight in a store for more than 60 seconds and your heart dropped into your stomach. Maybe your pet darted into the street and you saw headlights coming. Maybe your partner didn't answer their phone all night and you imagined the worst. In those moments, your body doesn't know the difference between, I think I lost them, and did I lose them? It reacts the exact same way. Adrenaline floods, your chest tightens, your thoughts spiral, and that's exactly what happened here. This wasn't just a man coming home to a drunk wife. This was a man experiencing a trauma imprint, his body encoding loss, even though she survived. And when the body encodes trauma, it leaves behind the residue. The residue is what he's wrestling with: anger, gratitude, confusion, fear, a cocktail of emotions that don't seem to make sense, but make perfect sense when you understand trauma. And here's the part that people don't often talk about. Fear rarely stays as fear. It usually morphs into anger. And why does it do that? It's because fear floods your body with energy, and that energy has to go somewhere. And when that threat disappears, when you realize your partner is alive, not dead, your nervous system doesn't just turn off like a switch. It discharges that energy into a form of anger. So just think about it. You grab your toddler after losing sight of them. What's the first thing you say? Don't you ever run off again. That's anger, not because you hate them, but because you almost lost them. A teenager comes home late, and you've been imagining accidents, hospitals, worst case scenarios, but they walk in and they're fine, and you just explode. Where the hell have you been? And that right there is not bad parenting or overreacting. That's trauma in action. That's the body processing fear by converting it into rage. And this man, he experienced the same exact thing. Relief she wasn't dead, rage that she had put him in that position, gratitude she survived, and anger that her friends left her, confusion that she was laughing it off. When emotions don't make sense, when they collide in contradiction, That's usually a sign that trauma had just happened. And here's why that story is blowing up online. It's because almost everyone can relate to that moment where fear and anger dance together. Maybe not a bathtub scenario, but maybe watching someone you love self-destruct with substances. Seeing your partner make reckless choices that could cost them their life. Experiencing that helplessness of not being able to control another human being's safety. This story touches a nerve because it's not just about alcohol. It's about how fragile life is. It's about how quickly everything could change. And it's about the terrifying truth that sometimes the people we love the most put themselves in danger and that we can't stop them. That helplessness right there, that's one of the hardest emotions for a human nervous system to process, which is why so many people are engaging with this post. It's not just drama, it's recognition. So where do we go from here? This is where relationships either fracture or they deepen. He has a choice. He can lead with fury, shame, and control, which will push her away, make her defensive, and turn this into a fight. Or he can lead with fear, vulnerability, and accountability, which can transform this from a drunken accident into a defining moment of growth. And here's the truth. Every couple faces moments like this. Maybe not bathtub close calls, but moments where fear collides with love, where safety collides with recklessness, where we have to decide, do I weaponize this or do I use it to grow? And that's why this story matters. It's a mirror for every relationship. So in this deep dive, we're going to unpack 5 core lessons: the autonomy of trauma and why anger follows fear, the psychology of alcohol and why it creates danger in relationships, how to hold your partner accountable without shaming them, the role of friends and why collective responsibility matters, and how couples can turn near tragedy into deeper connection. Let's start with the nervous system, because once you understand the body's trauma response, everything else makes sense. All right, let's zoom into the real engine behind the story, which is trauma. Because if you only read this Reddit post at the surface level, you might think it's about alcohol or about irresponsibility or about bad friends. And yes, these elements do matter, but at its core, this is about what happens to the human nervous system when it believes, even for 30 seconds, that someone you love is gone. So let's slow it down and walk through it step by step. When he opened the bathroom door, the first thing that happened wasn't thought. It was not logic. What it was alarm. The brain has a nervous system called the amygdala. Think of it as the smoke detector of your mind. It's very nuanced. It does not ask, is this really a fire? It just screams danger. So the second he saw his wife face down in that bathtub, his amygdala sounded the alarm. Adrenaline submerged. His heart rate spiked. His muscles tensed. His breathing quickened. And this right there is the fight or flight system doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It preps the body to respond to life or death situation. And here's the important part. The brain doesn't wait for proof. It just reacts to perception. So in his body, in that moment, his wife wasn't drunk. She was not asleep. She was not safe. She was dead. That's what his nervous system encoded. Now, what happens when you live through a false alarm? You think relief would cancel it out, but that's not how the nervous system works. The shock, it leaves an imprint. And we call this a trauma imprint. Just think about it. A parent loses sight of their child in a grocery store. This has happened to me before. What happens? You find them, and 2 minutes later, relief doesn't ease the panic. That imprint, it lives on. Or a situation where a driver slams on the brakes to avoid collision. No crash happens, but that relief does not ease the image of the headlights coming at them because the body, it remembers. Or a situation where someone answers the phone to hear their partner's been in an accident. Later they found out it was a mistake, but the relief does not erase the surge of dread that hit them. And that right there is what happened to this husband. For however long those seconds were, his body believed he had lost his wife. That memory, that jolt, will sit in his nervous system. And unless it's processed, it will come out sideways as anger, irritability, or even distance from her. Now let's tackle the big emotional contradiction. Why was he both grateful and furious? And here's the science. Fear primes the body for action. It gives you energy to survive. But once the threat disappears, that energy has nowhere to go. It doesn't just evaporate, it converts into anger. And this is why parents scold their kids after saving them from danger. It's why we yell, "Don't you ever do that again," even as we hug them tightly. It's not being a hypocrite, it's biology. The nervous system discharges fear through anger. And that's exactly what this man describes. I feel so angry but grateful at the same time. His body was cycling through survival energy. And if he doesn't understand that, if he thinks anger means he's failing as a husband, he'll misinterpret his own reaction. Now let's bring this into the relationship lens. When trauma enters a relationship, it does one of two things. It bonds, the couple faces danger, survives it, and feels closer. This is where we hear stories like, "That night changed us. We never take each other for granted again." Or it breaks. The trauma energy turns into resentment, blame, or distance. That couple doesn't process it together, and instead it becomes a wedge. And the difference between those two things comes down to whether we talk about it openly. We name the fear, and we move towards accountability. If he just channels his trauma into rage, "You almost killed yourself, you were reckless, I can't believe you did this," then he risks breaking the relationship. If he uses the trauma as an entry point for vulnerability, "Last night, I thought I had lost you. I don't ever want to feel that way again," then he opens the door into bonding. That's the choice that every couple has when trauma hits, to weaponize it or to transform it. Let me teach you a concept that we use in trauma counseling. It's the window of tolerance. Picture a window. When you're inside it, your nervous system is calm, regulated, and present. You can think clearly, you can feel emotions without being overwhelmed. And when you go outside of it, you hit one of two states: hyperarousal, which is fight or flight, panic, anger, and reactivity, or hypoarousal, which is shutdown, numbness, disconnection, and collapse. Now think about this story. The husband hit hyperarousal, which was panic, shaking, shouting, and rage. And the wife was hypoarousal, which was intoxicated, incoherent, laughing off the danger. They were on opposite ends of the window. And here's the problem. When two partners are outside the window in different directions, communication collapses. One is desperate to make it serious, and the other can't even feel the seriousness. And this is why couples in trauma moments talk past each other. It's not because they don't care. It's because their nervous systems are not aligned. You might be listening and thinking, "But what does this mean for me? I haven't come to find my partner face down in a bathtub," which that's a fair question. But here's the thing. Trauma in relationships isn't about the extreme moments. It's about everyday ruptures that shock our nervous system. You thought your partner cheated because of a text you saw. Your body encoded betrayal before you found the truth. Or you heard your partner's car was in an accident, and even though they ended up fine, you imagined losing them when they were late coming home. The feelings that come with those things, they leave imprints in your body. And if they're not named, if they're not processed, they turn into resentment, anxiety, control, or distance. That's why I'm spending time here. Because if you can understand the autonomy of trauma in relationships, you can start to recognize when your anger isn't actually anger. It's fear wearing a disguise. So let's recap. His body encoded trauma, even though his wife survived. Fear often shows up later as anger. Trauma can bond or break a relationship depending on how it's processed. And when couples are outside of the window of tolerance in opposite direction, communication becomes impossible. And this is why what happens the day after matters so much. Because it's not just about the incident, it's about how you make sense of it together. Which brings us to Act 3, which is alcohol. Because we can't tell the story without thinking about how alcohol hijacks safety, relationships, and accountability. Now that we've unpacked the trauma piece, let's talk about the other half of the story, the alcohol half. Because alcohol wasn't just the backdrop here. It was the accelerator. It was a thing that turned an ordinary night out into a brush with tragedy. And if you've ever been in a relationship touched by alcohol, whether lightly, heavily, or somewhere in between, you know it has a way of magnifying everything. So I want to dive into 3 things here. Why alcohol is uniquely dangerous for safety, physically and rationally, how alcohol shifts relationship dynamics in ways that couples often overlook, and how to recognize when it's a one-off mistake versus when it's a red flag situation. Let's start with the basics. What does alcohol do to your body? First, it lowers inhibition. That's the part that most people think about. It makes you more social, more daring, more relaxed. Second, it impairs coordination and reaction time. That's why driving under the influence is so deadly. And third, and this is the most important for this story, it suppresses the nervous system. Alcohol is a depressant. It slows down brain function. That means if you're already tired, already dehydrated, or you haven't eaten, alcohol hits harder, and sometimes much harder. And this is exactly what the wife described later. She hadn't eaten, she drank wine on an empty stomach, and it overwhelmed her system. And the result was loss of awareness. She wasn't just tipsy. She wasn't just silly drunk. She was incoherent, unsafe, unconscious in water. That's not funny, that's lethal. One of the biggest lies alcohol tells us is that I'm safe. How many times have you heard someone slur their words? Or maybe you said them yourself. The brain under alcohol believes it's functioning better than it actually is. And that's an illusion of control. This illusion right here is why people insist they can drive when they absolutely cannot. People think they can swim or bathe when they absolutely should not. People downplay their level of impairment because in their mind, it doesn't feel as bad as it looks. And here's the relationship kicker. When one partner buys into that illusion, I'm fine, stop reacting, and the other partner sees the danger, it creates a conflict loop. One minimizes and the other escalates. And suddenly, it's not just about the alcohol. It's about trust. It's about respect. It's about whether or not your partner believes you when you say, this is not safe. Alcohol also stirs up conflict in relationships, not just because of what happens during drinking, but because of the aftermath. And here's what I see in counseling rooms all of the time. One partner feels embarrassed or betrayed by what the other did while drunk, and the other partner feels judged or micromanaged for being called out. Both partners talk about the event. You were so drunk, you embarrassed me, you scared me, but they don't talk about the impact. But the impact is what matters. The impact is, I felt unsafe. I felt like I lost you. I don't know if I can trust you to keep yourself safe. When couples avoid the impact conversation, then alcohol becomes a wedge. It's not about the drinks anymore. It's about the rapture and trust. Now let's talk about risk. Alcohol increases risk taking. That's not news, but the real danger isn't just risky choices. It's risky context. Baths, pools, cars, strangers, all of these things become even more dangerous under alcohol. That's why one of the most simplest, most practical agreements I teach couples is no high-risk activities when intoxicated. No baths, no swimming, no driving, no wandering alone in unsafe places. This isn't about control, it's about survival. You don't make rules like this because you don't trust your partner. You make them because you value their life. And if you've ever lost someone to a preventable accident, then you know exactly why this matters. Now let's zoom out a little bit. In this Reddit post, the husband clarified, his wife isn't normally a drinker. This was not a pattern. It was a one-off, a perfect storm of no food, lots of wine, first time letting loose. That's an important distinction because one night of recklessness doesn't automatically equal a drinking problem. It does not automatically equal a red flag marriage. Here's how I break it down for clients. One-off incidents, rare, unusual, out of character. Partner takes accountability, apologizes, and adjusts behavior moving forward. But if it's an emerging patterns, then it happens repeatedly, excuses are made, apologies don't lead to change, partner downplays or minimizes the impact, that's a red flag problem. Denial, blame shifting, refusal to acknowledge the risk, ongoing erosion of trust. The difference between a mistake and a red flag is not the event, it's the response after the event. And in this case, she responded with accountability. She owned it, she apologized, she understood the gravity. That leans towards mistake, not pattern. And here's why stories like this blow up on Reddit and TikTok. Because everyone has experience with alcohol, whether it's themselves, their partner, a friend, or a family member. People know what it feels like to lose trust because of alcohol. People know what it's like to argue about how drunk you are. People know the hopelessness of watching someone they love lose control. And these stories go viral, not because they're unique, but because they're unusual. And the counselor take is this: we don't learn by shaming people who've had too much. We learn by naming the impact, setting boundaries, and creating safer agreements. So here's where we're at. Alcohol doesn't just lower inhibitions, it lowers safety. It creates illusions of control that cause conflict in relationships. It magnifies risk behaviors, especially in unsafe contexts like bathtubs. And whether alcohol is a mistake or a red flag depends entirely on how accountability is handled afterward. Which brings us to the heart of the matter. How do you actually have conversations the next morning? How do you hold someone accountable without shaming them? And that's what we're going to unpack next. Up until now, we've talked about trauma, we've talked about alcohol, but the real question this husband was wrestling with on Reddit is this: how do I even begin the conversation tomorrow? That's where we need to slow down, because the words you choose in those moments, they can either heal a relationship or fracture it. And here's the challenge. Most people default to one of the two extremes after a crisis like this. They either come in with pure anger or they come in with pure relief, and neither of those work. Let's break it down. Extreme one is pure anger. This is the lecture mode, the explosion, the how could you do this to me? You scared me half to death. You embarrassed yourself. You could have died. Now, does it make sense emotionally? Absolutely. Anger is a trauma response and it wants out. But here's the problem. When you come at your partner with anger, they don't hear fear. They don't hear love. What they do hear is attack. And what do humans do when they feel attacked? They defend, they minimize, and they blame shift. So if you go in with pure anger, you may feel justified, but you actually decrease the chance of accountability. And then there's extreme two, which is pure relief. This is the brush it off mode. The I'm just glad you're okay. Let's not talk about it. Now this one sounds kind, but it's actually dangerous. And it's dangerous because when you avoid the seriousness, you minimize the learning. You rob the relationship the chance to grow, and you leave the door wide open for it to happen again. So what anger does is it alienates, and what relief does is it minimizes. Both miss the mark. So where's the middle path? The alternative is the middle path, the place where accountability and compassion hold hands. Think about it like this. If anger is the fire and relief is the flood, you don't need to burn it down or wash it away. You need a steady flame, something strong enough to illuminate the truth, but gentle enough to keep the connection alive. And the way we do that is with a conversation framework that I call the fear impact invitation framework. And here's how that works. Step one is you lead with fear. You start with the emotion underneath the anger, which was fear. Last night, I thought I lost you. I've never been that scared in my life. I don't want to ever go through that again. When you lead with fear, you open the door to empathy, because nobody wants to be the cause of their partner's terror. And then step two is you describe the impact. You paint the picture of what happened to you, not a lecture about what they did, but a description of how it landed on you. I saw your face down in the water, and my body thought you were gone. I was shaking you awake, praying that you would breathe. I can still feel my hands trembling thinking about it. When you describe the impact, you invite your partner into your world. You help them understand the weight of their actions, not through judgment, but through experience. And step 3 is you extend the invitation. Now, instead of telling them what to do, you invite them to participate in a solution. What do you think we need to do differently so this never happens again? How can we keep each other safe moving forward? What boundaries do we need to agree on for nights like this? That invitation, it's powerful because it shifts responsibility back to them. It's not you nagging, it's not you policing, it's you opening the door for accountability. Now let's pause for a second and talk about shame, because a lot of people think if I scared them enough, they'll change. But here's the truth. Shame never creates sustainability change. It creates defensiveness. When someone feels shamed, they go into 3 responses. Defend, it wasn't that bad. You're overreacting. Deflect, well, you've done reckless things too. Or detach, whatever, I don't care. And all 3 of those kills intimacy. Accountability, on the other hand, says something like, I respect you enough to hold you to a standard, but I love you enough to do it with compassion. That's the formula right there that builds trust. Let me give you 2 examples so you can hear the difference. So in a shame-based conversation, you're unbelievable. Do you realize what you put me through? You're a grown adult. What the hell were you thinking? I can't trust you to keep yourself safe. That's a shame-based conversation. What happens here is that she shuts down. She either gets defensive or she spirals into guilt. But either way, nothing changes in the shame-based conversation. But accountability plus compassion type of conversation is something like, when I found you last night, I thought you were gone. I was shaking you, begging you to wake up. I don't want to feel like that again. So we need to figure out together how to make sure this never happens again. And what happens in this type of conversation is that she feels the weight, but she also feels the love. She understands the seriousness, but she's not crushed under shame. And that right there, that's the sweet spot. And John Gottman, he's one of the leading researchers on marriage. He talks about something called repair attempts. These are small ways couples try to de-escalate after conflict or rupture. And here's the key. It's not the absence of mistakes that predicts relationship success. It's the presence of successful repair attempts. What this husband is doing by reaching out for advice, by asking, how do I have the conversation, is actually a repair attempt. He's saying, I don't want this to break us. I want to get it right. That mindset alone puts this couple in a stronger position than most. So let me ask you, have you ever come at your partner with pure anger only to realize later that it really was fear underneath? Or maybe you've gone the other way, brushed something off because you didn't want to start the fight, but deep down it actually left you feeling unsafe. What would have changed if you had led with fear, described the impact, and it extended an invitation instead? These are the questions that transform relationships, because accountability isn't about pointing the finger. It's about holding hands while facing the truth together. So here's what we've covered. Anger alone alienates. Relief alone minimizes. The middle path is accountability plus compassion. The fear impact invitation framework gives you a script that works. And shame never creates lasting change. But accountability does. Now we've talked about trauma, we've talked about alcohol, and we've talked about accountability. But there's another layer to this story that we can't ignore. It's the role of the friends. Because when you're the drunkest you've ever been and your friends leave you like that, that's not just a bad night, that's a boundary issue. And that's where we're going next. Friends, boundaries, and collective responsibility. So far, we've been looking at this story through the lens of trauma, alcohol, and accountability between husband and wife. Because let's not forget, one of her friends texted him that night to say, she's the drunkest she's ever been. She's in a bad way, but don't worry, my boyfriend is taking us home. And then what happened? His wife still ended up face down in the bathtub, unconscious, with her phone at the bottom. That means at some point, the collective responsibility broke down. And when friends leave each other at their most vulnerable, it's not just a bad night, it's a safety issue. It's a boundary issue. It's a wake-up call. So let's start here. Psychologists have studied something called bystander effect. It's the phenomenon where people are less likely to take action in a crisis when others are around. Everyone assumes someone else will step in, so nobody does. Now translate that into a party or a girls' night. The more people around, the easier it is for responsibility to get diffused. Oh, she's fine. Someone else is looking after her. It's not my job. But here's the truth. When someone is the drunkest they've ever been, when they're incoherent, when they're at risk of injury or worse, that's not just a funny story. That's a medical emergency waiting to happen. And friends have a responsibility to step up. Because in that state, she wasn't capable of making safe choices for herself. She needed someone else to make them for her. This brings us to something I call the safety contract of friendship. When you get out drinking with friends, whether you realize it or not, you're entering into an unspoken agreement. I'll look after you and you'll look after me. And that means you don't leave someone alone when they're too drunk to function. You don't put them in unsafe contexts like water, strangers, cars, or isolated places. You don't brush it off as just having fun when their safety is on the line. The safety contract doesn't mean you're responsible for their choices, but it does mean you're responsible for whether they make it home alive. Now you might be asking, okay, but what does that have to do with marriage? Isn't this between her and her friends? Yes and no, because in relationships, your partner's safety network becomes part of your safety network. If their friends are reckless, inattentive, or unreliable, it impacts you. Just think about it. If your partner is out with people who won't protect them, you carry the anxiety, you carry the fallout, you carry the trauma when something goes wrong. So it's not controlling to ask, can I trust the people you're with to take care of you if you can't take care of yourself? That's not micromanaging, that's survival. All right, so how do you actually set boundaries with friends without blowing up the relationship? And how you do this is it starts with clarity, not blame. You don't need a 10-paragraph rage text. You need a one clear statement that's rooted in safety. So here are a few examples. Last night could have ended in tragedy. Please don't ever leave her alone like that again. Or if you see her this drunk again, I need to know she'll be with someone responsible until she's safe. Or, I know everyone was having fun, but when she's incoherent, she needs protection, not space. So notice the tone. It's not, you're horrible friends, you don't care about her, I don't trust you. Because if it was that, this would just make them defensive. It's more like, here's the seriousness, here's the boundary, I expect you to step up. That's how you set boundaries that stick. Firm, clear, but not shaming. In the Reddit post, the husband later said he messaged her friends and they were apologetic. They said they will never leave her like that again, and that's a good sign. That shows accountability. But let's talk about the other scenario when the friends don't apologize, when they minimize, when they say, it wasn't that bad, you're being dramatic. That's when you have to make a choice, because if someone refuses to acknowledge danger after a near-death situation, then that's not a safe friend. And if they're not safe for your partner, then they're not safe for your marriage. It doesn't mean you have to cut people off, but it does mean you have to lower their access. You have to adjust expectations. And you have to decide, are these people the people that I want around my partner when I can't be there? And that's not controlling, that's protecting your family. Now, here's where a lot of couples get stuck. They confuse collective responsibility with control. One partner says something like, I need your friends to take care of you if you're too drunk, and the other partner hears that you don't trust me, you don't want me to have fun, you're trying to control me. But let's be clear, this isn't about control, it's about survival, it's about community, it's about what it means to belong to each other. We don't survive alone, we survive because we look out for one another. And that right there, that's true friendship, that's true in marriages, and that's true in life. So I want to turn this back to you for a moment. Think about the friends in your life. If you were ever incoherent, intoxicated, or unsafe, do you know who would step up? Do you know who would get you home safe? Do you know who would protect you if you couldn't protect yourself? And on the flip side, Are you that person for your friends? Are you the one who would step in, who would say, I'm not leaving you until you're safe? Because this isn't just about alcohol. It's about loyalty. It's about responsibility. It's about whether the people around us rise to the occasion when it matters the most. So here's what we've learned in this app. The bystander effect makes it much easier for friends to look away. But true friends, they step up. The safety contract of friendship means I'll look out for you and you'll look out for me. And in relationships, your partner's safety network becomes your safety network. Boundaries with friends need to be firm, clear, and rooted in safety, not in blame. And if friends won't acknowledge danger after a near-death moment, then that right there is a red flag. Now that we've covered trauma, we've covered alcohol, we've covered accountability, and we've covered friends, that leaves one final piece of this story, which is transformation. So here's the question we've been building towards. Does one reckless night define a marriage? And the answer is no. What defines a marriage is not the mistake. What defines it is the response and what happens next. So this section is about transformation and how couples can take moments that nearly destroy them and instead use them to grow stronger. Let's start with the biggest distinction of all, mistake versus pattern. A mistake is an event. It's rare. It's out of character. It comes with genuine apology and genuine accountability. But a pattern, on the other hand, that's repetition. It's excuses. It's minimization. It's denial. And here's what matters. A marriage can survive a mistake, but a marriage will collapse under a pattern. And in the Reddit story, the wife admitted what happened. She said she hadn't eaten, she drank too much, and she got incoherent. She didn't deny it. She didn't blame him. She didn't laugh it off the next day. She apologized. And that right there, that's what accountability looks like. That tells us this was a mistake, and mistakes are survivable if you grow from them. So how do you grow from a mistake like this? You turn pain into prevention. Just think about it. Every safety rule we have in society exists because of past pain. Seatbelts, crosswalks, life jackets. The same is true in relationships. Close calls should create new agreements. And here are a few practical ones that this couple, and honestly that any couple, can make. No high-risk activities when drunk. No baths, no swimming, no diving. Eat before you drink. It sounds simple, but it can change everything. Then check-in agreements. A quick text update every hour during a night out. And then friend responsibility. If one person is too drunk, then no one leaves until they're all safe. And these aren't about control. They're about love. They're about saying, I want you alive tomorrow. So here's what we agree to today. Now let's talk about trauma again, but this time as a catalyst. Because trauma can break people, yes, but trauma can also bond people. Surviving a close call can create a new layer of intimacy if it's processed together. Just think about couples who survive car accidents, health scares, losses. They often come out saying, we never take each other for granted again. That's available here too. If they process it together, if he names his fear, if he receives it with accountability, and if they turn the event into a lesson instead of a weapon, then that's what I mean by transformation. That's when the thing that could have ended you becomes a thing that deepens you. But let's be clear, not every story ends that way. If she had woken up defensive, laughing it off and saying, you're dramatic, I'm fine, stop controlling me, that would be a red flag. Because denial after a near-death experience tells you that this isn't just a mistake. It tells you that this is a blind spot, a refusal to face reality. And here's the counselor truth. Marriages don't collapse because of the incident. They collapse because of the refusal to deal with the incident. So the red flag isn't that she drank too much. The red flag would have been refusing to own it after. Now let's get practical. How do we repair trust after something like this? Step one is to name the fear. The husband needs to say out loud, I thought I lost you, and that terrified me. Step two is to receive the apology. The wife needs to say, I get it, I scared you, I'll do better. And he needs to allow himself to believe that. And step three is to set anew agreements. They need to co-create rules for safety going forward. And step four is to release the residue. And this one is important. If he holds on to the anger indefinitely, then that turns into resentment. And he has to let the apology land. He has to let the trust rebuild. And that right there is how you rebuild trust. Not by pretending it never happened, but by integrating it into the fabric of the relationship. And this is where I want to bring you in. Think about a time when your partner scared you. Maybe it was an alcohol, maybe it was a car accident, maybe it was a health scare, maybe it was a reckless decision. Did it bring you closer or did it push you apart? And if it pushed you apart, was it because of the event or was it because how you processed it afterward? And these are the questions that determine whether a relationship crumbles or strengthens under pressure.
So here's the bigger lesson from this Reddit story. One reckless night does not have to define a marriage. What defines it is how you repair. If you weaponize it, you create distance. If you minimize it, you create danger. If you face it together, you create transformation. And that's the choice that every couple has when crisis hits. And that's the choice that this husband and wife has now. So let me leave you with this. When disaster nearly strikes, do you choose the blame or do you choose growth? Because in the end, that choice right there determines whether your relationship survives the storm or shrinks under it. And if you want to keep exploring how real life stories like this reveal the deeper psychology of love, trust, and accountability, hit subscribe. Because next time, we're going to unpack another story that looks simple on the surface, but underneath tells us everything we need to know about the relationships. I'll see you on the next one.